I'll try to keep it pretty short. I know that there's a lot of good conversation that's going to come out in here, so I'll go ahead and move right on to turning it over to Mary Miracle from the Cincinnati Alumni Chapter.
And thanks so much, James. And again, we want to thank all of you for joining us today. We are quite excited to be able to present this programming to all of you. However, we do have a few housekeeping things we would like to take care of first. So to begin with, all of you should be on mute. I hope that's the case. Please, if you're not, and you are an attendee, can we ask that you go on mute? And the other thing we want to mention is that we will be handling questions at the end of the presentations by our panelists. However, if you do happen to have questions, please enter them into the chat box. And if there is a specific panelist you would like to have that question directed to, be sure to put their name in that question so that we can have it answered by that person. We are recording this presentation today. And I mention that because, well, that means you have to be on your good behavior. So, and actually I would expect nothing less than from all of you, but I just thought I should mention that. And just a reminder, because we are recording this, we will be sending this out to all of our registrants, whether they were able to attend or not. But do keep in mind, if you are not on your best behavior, I do reserve the right to send this recording to your mother. So please keep that in mind. So with that being said, I would like to introduce our facilitator for the day, and her name is Karen Morgan. So Karen actually graduated from Duke University with a degree in mechanical engineering, and then joined GE in the Cincinnati area. And she also completed her degree in aerospace engineering at the University of Cincinnati. She's held several engineering roles, followed with customer-facing roles. However, she now is a senior operations manager, and she works to develop digital solutions to make engine data available to GE's technical and analytics teams. She has been a leader in GE's GLBTA Alliance since 2005. She volunteers with the Human Rights Campaign and has been a member of the Cincinnati's Human Rights Campaign Steering Committee since 2011. She's also on the HRC's National Board of Directors. And she has been leading LGBT educational sessions at GE, as well as other companies for over 12 years, and recently started Equality Academy to continue the training focus. And outside of work, she and her wife, Kim, enjoy gardening. They spend time with their friends and keeping up with their 6 adult children and their 1 beautiful grandson. So brothers, pledges, guests, please welcome Karen Morgan. And Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mary and Jim. Thanks to everyone who's helped put this together. And thank you all who are attending. Welcome to our What Not to Say event. This event is going to focus on something called a microaggression and how microaggressions can impact people who are on the receiving end of that. So what I want to do before I introduce the panel is to just go through a few definitions here. So let's start with macroaggressions. I mean, those are the in-your-face kind of comments and behaviors, open hostility. These are these things that are, verbally abusive, a violation of people's personal space. And the person who's perpetuating that is very conscious of what they're doing and of what they're saying as they're perpetuating what we would call a macroaggression. The next is a microaggression, which is different. Microaggressions are generally a result of unconscious bias. It's a result of our stereotypes that make us, think about a certain group of people a certain way, and we might say something. And a lot of times we might be saying something that we think is a compliment, However, on the receiving end, it's not seen as a compliment. It might be seen, it can be seen as a microaggression. For example, wow, you speak English so well. And so in the end, there are things that usually people aren't even aware of. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today are these microaggressions, which are the day-to-day things that we say and do that might be hurting somebody else unknowingly. And then finally, we have microaffirmations, which are kind of on the good side of it. How do we affirm people? How do we recognize people and listen to everybody in the room, that sort of thing. So like I said, our focus today is on microaggressions, and we've assembled a great panel that's going to take us through this. So when I flip to the slide, you'll see our panelists cover or represent a lot of different, let's say, groups within our culture that might be on that receiving end of microaggressions. And so really the purpose today is really to raise awareness in all of us about things we say and do and how they can affect other people. So it's really about coming away better understanding some other groups within our culture and some of the things that can cause these microaggressions. And as Mary said, we want this to be interactive. I'm going to start, each panelist is going to be able to share some of their story at the beginning, but we want to encourage everybody's participation. So if you have thoughts or questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Or also, when it comes time for questions, people can come off mute as well. So what I'm going to do now is show you who our panelists are today. They'll go a little bit deeper into introducing themselves, because after I go through this, I'm going to actually stop sharing so you can see all the panelists. So we have Greg Hyland, who's going to be speaking from the LGBT plus perspective, and Lauren Duncan, who will also be speaking from the LGBT plus perspective. Surya is Elangovan. I may not be getting all my last names pronounced exactly right, but Surya is going to be speaking from the Asian perspective. Fina is going to be speaking to us from both a female and Asian perspective. Ali is going to be speaking from the Black perspective, as is Ray. And Carlos will be speaking from the Hispanic perspective, and Mary from both female and as a person with disability. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see everybody. And then what I'll do is I'm going to call out and step through each panelist, and they'll, again, kind of reintroduce themselves, which perspective they're going to speak to, and they're going to share a couple of examples with you of typical microaggressions and maybe things what not to say, and maybe if it's applicable for the examples that they're sharing, what would be a better way to approach this or a better thing to say. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Greg Hyland to kick us off.
Hi, Karen, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great, thanks. So my name is Greg Hyland. I am from GE Aviation. I am a lean customer success manager, so working directly with our customers to make sure that they're having no waste in their processes. As Karen mentioned, my perspective today is from the LGBT plus community, and specifically as a gay man. My partner Drew and I live in Cincinnati, and there's a number of really good examples that I could share. But the one that as I've been thinking about what I'd like to share with you all tonight is the situation of a family photo. So for my family, we specifically take a family photo every time one of our family members gets married. And so we haven't had very many weddings lately in our family, but when we get together, we do have that family photo. And at the most recent wedding, it was pretty non-controversial. My brother was married about 4 years ago, and when it came time for the wedding's photos, he said, "Okay, everybody's in the photo. Let's all get together." And whether that reduced the pain and agony for him to decide who was going to be in the photo or not, I don't know. But I do know that I felt included and my partner Drew felt included because we could be in the photo. But it got me thinking a little bit more about family photos. And so on Drew's side, my partner, his side of the family, that family photo happens every July. And when we get together for our family photo, and we've been together a little over 7 years, the first year, I didn't go to visit his family that July, so it was a non-thing. But they take their family photo, get together, and if you go to their house, you can see all the family photos going all the way back to the 1970s. And so the second year that we were together that summer, they had the family photo, and Drew's mother asked me to be the photographer, which was interesting because we were still fairly early on in our relationship, but I was a little bit taken aback that I'm not a photographer. My profession is working with customers doing lean projects, and is not as a photographer. If you look at these photos over the years, they're very professionally done photos. But I thought, okay, well, I'm being included, so that's a good thing. And then so another year came by, and I think I actually maybe left early because of the way the holiday fell, and so it didn't come up that year, and I left before the family photo happened. And then a fourth year came, and I was not included in the family photo, and I was disappointed a little bit. But Drew's siblings, there are three of them, they are all legally technically married. Drew and I are not married yet, and I thought, well, maybe that's the line, and I'll just wait and see what happens over time. And so 4th of July, when they take the picture, happened, went. And the next day, Drew's mom came to me and said, I feel like I owe you an apology. And I said, I mean, by then I had forgotten about the family photo. And she said, I should have included you in the family photo. I didn't realize that was uncomfortable for me. She's saying this about herself. And it must have been uncomfortable for you too. And so people had already started to leave from the family, so there wasn't an opportunity. She said, but next year, you'll be in the family photos. So sure enough, we came around to that 5th year, and I've been in the last 3 family photos, which is really nice. But she did open that door for me, because I told her after she said that she felt uncomfortable, I said, well, I felt excluded. And that may be difficult to understand why I would feel that way. And I wanted to extend a little bit of grace to you, because I didn't know really where the line was. But I'm grateful that you told me. And so she and I have developed a really nice friendship over the last couple of years. In fact, we traveled the last 2 Thanksgivings. But it was because I think a combination of her coming to the recognition that family photo is an opportunity for a microaggression, like Karen was talking about, but also that I think I gave her a little bit of room to get there. And I think those 2 things together have not every family photo situation works out that well and that nicely and that beautiful, but it did make me think about making sure that I'm candid when the opportunity arrives. And so that, there's many other things that I'm sure folks will talk about, but for me, that was really important to be included in Drew's family. And I think Drew too, for my family, to be included in those moments that matter.
Great, thanks, Greg. All right, moving on to Lauren then.
Hi, my name is Lauren Duncan. I also work at General Electric. I work in customer technical programs, integrating technology with our airline customers. So I'm representing LGBTQ also on this panel. I'm sharing from a transgender perspective. So I'm 32 years old right now. I transitioned, outside of work, age 24, in the workplace, age 25. So there's a lot of microaggressions I experienced. I think, first of all, I'm not going to dive too deeply into this, but it's very obvious that if someone is transgender, you should use their preferred name and pronouns. But what trips people up sometimes is when they talk about someone in the past tense. So something I've experienced so often is with friends that knew me before, or even colleagues at work, is, when talking about a past event or a past project, they would use my past tense as my male name and male pronouns, which is a little bit odd, right? So say, somebody gets married, you don't refer to them retroactively with their, maiden name, for example. The consequence of that, it might seem pretty minimal, but not every transgender person even wants their previous name disclosed. I mean, maybe there is a safety issue, maybe it's just a personal preference. So what to do, always, when you're talking about a transgender person retroactively, always default to the name and pronouns of, who they are today. And then something else I want to talk about, and this one, it seems like a compliment, but it has, very negative repercussions when you think about it. Very often people, when they compliment a trans person, they might say something like, wow, I'd have no idea you were trans, or wow, you seem like you look cisgender. And a lot of people, they think that's a compliment. Some trans people might want to hear that. But think about, what that is implying. That's almost implying that, the success of your transition is based on the way you look, which is a very, arbitrary cultural beauty standard. It also implies that someone that doesn't meet that standard is, maybe that implies that their transition isn't successful, and that cannot be the case, right? By, focusing on that and complimenting someone on that, you're placing the wrong value in something. And what if, behind someone's back, you had that conversation, it might seem good. What if somebody who was a transgender but hadn't transitioned heard you say that, and they didn't think that, passing as cisgender was within, the realm of opportunity for them? That might discourage them too. It creates the wrong behavior. So I think, something, what to say is, be objective. Like, tell someone, wow, you seem happier. Wow, you seem more confident. Let's not put value into how someone looks as, what's success in their life. So those are my stories, and feel free to ask questions later.
Thanks, Lauren. Moving on to Surya then.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. My name is Surya Langavan. I currently work at Amazon. So I am a program analyst for the 1P Labs. Amazon recently did a pledge to COVID test all frontline employees, and I'm working on that project where we bring that to fruition. So I'm working on that. So today I'll be representing the Asian perspective. And for me, I think a couple of my stories are, and I'm sure everybody's heard of this, but whenever I introduce myself to a new coworker or just somebody that I'm on the phone with, the first thing I immediately hear is, wow, looking at your name, I did not realize that your accent would be like what it is now. And, if we haven't met or if we haven't talked, like I just moved into a new apartment and I introduced myself to my neighbor and they're like, oh, what side of IT are you in? And, it was just an automatic assumption that I worked in IT or I'm good with numbers. While I might be good at both of those things, it doesn't mean that is what my profession or my career should be. So I work in supply chain, very happy with that. I am very tech savvy, but at the same time, I would prefer to have more of a conversation where we're asking about what it is you do rather than go straight into assumptions. But yeah, I'll keep mine short and sweet for now, but happy to field any questions or talk more about this later. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Surya. Fina, next.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sharafina, but most people call me Fina because my name is just too long. I'm a mergers and acquisitions consultant with Aon, where I primarily conduct risk and insurance due diligence on behalf of private equity and corporate clients. I graduated from Marshall University in 2012, which didn't seem too long ago, but it is. And I'm an alum of the Xi Epsilon chapter there. I'll be sharing my experiences and perspective as an Asian and a female, which, upon deeper thinking, I'm like, some of these overlap. One example, I've heard a lot where people say, wow, you're so vocal in meetings, like you speak up all the time. Aren't Asians supposed to be shy? And I think as a female in the corporate environment, especially when it's a male-dominated industry, I think there's that stereotype that you don't speak up as well, So instead of saying, oh, you're so vocal, I thought you were supposed to be shy, blah, 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 just maybe say, hey, good to hear your thoughts. I know it can be intimidating in a large setting, but glad you felt comfortable sharing your thoughts. Because I don't want my gender or my ethnicity to define who I am. as an individual in a work setting. You know, I'm there to do the best I can, so just don't try to put me in a box. Other examples, I've walked into meetings with a bunch of colleagues, some more junior than me, but they might reach out to a male colleague first versus me, even though I have more expertise in a certain line or whatever. Luckily, most of my team members, you know, they're hyper aware, I feel like, in our industry. So they'll speak up and say, oh, you know, Fina's an expert in this, like, let her talk through it. So there's a lot that I could share, but that's just some examples I have on top of my mind. But feel free to ask more questions. Happy to address them as they come up.
Great, thanks, Fina. Okay, moving on to Ollie now.
Sorry, almost forgot to unmute myself. So I'm Ollie. I work for Hilton Hotel.
Hey, Ollie, you're pretty faint. I can't hear you super well. Can you
hear me now?
It's still pretty faint.
Okay, maybe come back to me.
Okay.
Figure out my audio issue here. Sorry.
That's it. You're good now. You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Don't know what's going on. Probably my crappy Wi-Fi at my hotel. So I'm Ollie. I work for Hilton Hotels. I'm the general manager of Hampton Inn in West Palm Beach. I'll be speaking from the Black perspective, and I'm going to pick on my buddies in West Virginia for a little bit here. So when I moved to West Virginia, I would notice as I would go out or, you know, be out in public, you know, I'd have my name tag on because I'm just coming from work, or I'd be speaking to someone and I would, you know, let them know that I was the general manager of the hotel, and I would kind of get the up down stare, like, you're the general manager. And the first time it happened, I didn't really pay any mind, but it kept happening. And you know, again, a microaggression that people don't really know that they're putting off. And so finally, after about the 5th time that happened, I went back and I was talking to my team, and they made me very keenly aware that in Beckley, West Virginia, I'm a rarity, a Black man that's actually running the company. That doesn't happen. So when people find out that I'm the general manager, they're a little shocked and amazed, I guess. But that also helped me to realize something else that was happening at my own hotel. I would notice that if I didn't come into work super chipper, super like bubbly, everybody would wonder, what's wrong with Ollie? Is he okay? Is he mad about something? And by the end of the day, I was mad because everybody thought I was mad about something. And just processing what they had told me about me being a rarity, and it made me realize that, you know, media has taught us, the shows that we watch, the news that we watch, to fear the angry Black guy. So anytime I come in not in a happy mood, it's, oh crap, stay away, Ollie's in a bad mood. So I had to train myself how to tread a little bit lighter, but I also had to train them on not to fear me. You know, I come in some days and I'm just not chipper. But if you send me a funny meme or, you know, tell me a joke, hey, I'm laughing my butt off, you know? So it was a transition for me, because I grew up in a predominantly African-American city. When I left there, I moved to Florida, which is pretty diverse. So moving to West Virginia, which, don't get me wrong, the people are super nice. Absolutely loved my time in West Virginia, but moving to a population where, you know, the African-American population, moving to an area where the African-American population is 7% of the total population, I had to come to the understanding that I'm a rarity, and I had to train them on how to deal with me as I learned how to deal with them. One of the other small, I guess, microaggressions is, especially working at a hotel, you know, I answer the phone all the time. I speak pretty good English. And I've had several occasions where people come in and they go, oh, I thought you were a white guy, because I speak properly. And I don't really know how to answer that. Well, thanks. You know, I guess the proper way to compliment me on that is go, oh, I love to hear you talk, or I love your voice, or, you know, something other than I thought you were a white guy. So those are my two examples. I have more, but I don't want to take up all the time. So I'll let some of the other panelists go, but that's my story.
Thanks, Ollie. Great. Yeah, I think we'll be able to come back to everybody maybe later for some more examples as well. So Ray, moving on to you. We can't hear you, Ray.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, good now.
I'm very sorry. So I am Raymond Cousins. I also graduated from Marshall University, and sorry, it was playing back to me. Can you still hear me? Okay. I'm Raymond Cousins. I'm also from Marshall University and also a brother of Xi Upsilon Chapter with Fina. We have over a decade-long friendship, so it's great to be on here with her and everyone else. So I'm also representing the Black perspective. I currently live in Lexington, Kentucky. I work at Kentucky Medical Services Foundation, doing data analytics, mostly with the University of Kentucky Healthcare. So a couple of microaggressions that I've dealt with, one being since I was young, I remember being 11 years old, and it just has come over to adulthood. One was, you don't act like other Black people. So hearing that from a very young age, I adopted that, and I actually took that as a compliment, because we, as a people, naturally, Black people are looked at to be quote unquote ghetto or unbecoming. So if you don't fit into that stereotype, they think that they're complimenting you when they're still actually putting you down, because they're putting the people that you're in the same group with. So I was still young when I first heard it. So I just always made sure to adopt that and take that as a term of endearment, and run with it and be happy with it. And I never told my family, never told my friends that anyone said that to me. And into college years, I was still being told that and taught that. And so I just knew that I was doing something right until I hit my mid-20s. And I moved to Lexington, to where there was more diversity, and people were getting upset when people were saying the stuff to them, and I couldn't understand why. And I had a wake-up call. The color of your skin doesn't base what kind of level you are, intelligence, status, anything. So then I was asking all of my other Black friends, my family, had they had words like this said to them. They said yes and instantly got upset. I was confused also why I wasn't as upset as everyone else, because I thought that I was doing the right thing, by acting, quote unquote, not like the stereotypical Black person. But I was expected to act a certain type of way. So internally, I was fighting to not fit into that stereotype. Like Ollie, where he said that when he was talking to someone on the phone, they told him that they thought that he was a white guy. He heard it, he was confused. If someone told me that I didn't sound Black, it would startle me a little bit, but I would still somewhat take that as a term of endearment. Now I know it was a learning experience for me. That's not correct at all. Just, be happy that I can speak properly and that you can understand what I'm saying. Ignorance knows no color. That's the main thing that I learned, especially coming from a Black perspective and having to fight all of this time without knowing, it's exhausting to try to put on a front, especially when you don't know that you're fighting that front. It's more easier now for me to be able to have these hard conversations, especially with everything that's going on in the media and with the Black Lives Matter movement. That was definitely a lesson for me as well. But that's something that, you know, I'm able to address head on, and, you know, hopefully I will be able to educate someone if they approach me in that manner, and, you know, explain to them why that's not comfortable. And if, you know, people from my past approach me with that, explain to them, you know, why that is not okay now and why it was a problem back then and I didn't address it. Another microaggression actually comes from the Black community as well. There's a lot of internal racism that goes on with that. And sorry, Ollie, I'm using another example from you. But, you know, if people expect you to be angry or loud, obnoxious, and outspoken, we as a Black community have adopted those stereotypes, unfortunately. So if we don't act, you know, loud or rambunctious or obnoxious, we are considered to be the terms Uncle Tom, a white person trapped in a Black person's body, things like that. So we are, we're fighting racism internally, which, you know, hurts worse, because if you can't be understood by the people who look like you, how can we expect other people who look different than us to understand us? So we unfortunately adopt some of the negative stereotypes and everything. I mean, that was unfortunately my whole experience as well, up until adulthood. Most recently, I went to a hip hop dance class, and it's ridiculous. I was speaking with a couple of individuals, and they were asking me questions if I know certain things about certain spots here in Lexington, Kentucky. And I said no, because at the time I was brand new to the area. I think I had only been here maybe a few months. And so I expressed to them, no, I'm not originally from Kentucky, I'm from Ohio. And instead of, you know, educating me on these specific areas, the lady cut me off and just shouted in front of everyone, he doesn't understand where we come from. He's not Black, he is a Black man trapped. He's a white man trapped in a Black man's body. I was very embarrassed. I did not know how to respond. I went home and I had to think over and over and over again. And it was not an easy lesson to learn for myself, because although I've had things said to me, I've never had anyone come that aggressively towards me, especially using the word trapped. Because I've never felt trapped in anything that I've ever done. And to have those words spoken to me was very breathtaking. And when we are in a crucial time in these last few years with the Black Lives Matter movement, I was not sure why a person who looks like me, who was supposed to, you know, join forces with me in bringing awareness of, you know, excellence within the Black community, why I would be torn down by this individual. So, you know, unfortunately, microaggressions can come from people who do not look like you or do not understand you, but they also can come from people who look exactly like you. But there's more also. So if you have any questions later, I'm definitely.
Yeah, good perspective. Thanks, Raymond. Carlos.
Hey everyone, my name is Carlos. I am a brother from FAU in Boca Raton, Florida. I work at Alliant Energy in finance, focusing on mergers and acquisitions and renewable energy tax equity partnerships. And I'm very glad to be here. And thank you, James, and thank you, Karen, for inviting me to be part of the panel. First, I want to take an opportunity to draw on our DSP network and ask Surya if he has a contact on Amazon that can help me get a PS5, because I've been trying and I can't get one.
That's a negative.
Yeah, I know. That's what I expected. No, but I've been in awe of all of the stories that you guys have shared, and I guess I've been lucky to not be the target of that many microaggressions. I guess I'm 6'5", so that helps a little bit. But yeah, I definitely have some stories that I can share. One thing that I discussed with James and with Karen when I had the first call was that all Latinos that I know, all Hispanics that I know, hate the term Latinx. I don't know who came up with that term. I still haven't done the research, but I don't see myself as a Latinx or anything like that. So if you want to call someone Hispanic, Latino, I think it's fine. Latinx, I would stay away from that term. That's something that I can share. What else? I'm an American citizen, and one thing that sometimes hurts is when people come to me and they first tell me, hey, where are you from? It's like, well, I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, I'm American. And they assume because I look Hispanic or Latino or whatever, they assume that I'm not from here. And even though I wasn't born in the US and I became a citizen a few years ago, I spent half my life in the US and all my formative years having spent here. So I feel more American than I feel anything else. So that's something that I'll be careful. Some people are very proud for where they're from, and for them might be appropriate that, yeah, like, you know, I'm a Venezuelan or I'm Indian or I'm Mexican or whatever, but I feel American. So you shouldn't assume where you're opening up to them first, asking them where they're from, and just say, hey, were you born in the US, or something a little more tactful, I would say. Let's see. Another thing is I'm very self-conscious about my accent sometimes. I know I speak well and I can get my point across, but I've worked a lot and I keep working on cleaning up my accent so I can sound less as an immigrant. And it's not because I've heard people say bad things about it. It's just because that's a goal of mine. I don't think I have a particular recommendation on how to treat someone like that, but that's just an experience that I've felt, and I know people struggle with that point sometimes. And you know, having a thick accent or not getting the point across correctly, just be a little more careful when you're kind of bouncing back those ideas. Yeah, I mean, that's the stories that I have. Like I said, I'm lucky that I haven't been a target of too many aggressions. I can say that I live in Florida, I live in San Diego, and I live now in Madison, Wisconsin. And the place that I felt most comfortable is here in Madison. That comes to something from what Raymond said, that I felt more racism, not towards me, but towards each other in the Latin community. There's a lot of that kind of racism between all the Latin races, you know, Mexicans attack Venezuelans, Venezuelans attack Cubans, Cubans attack Colombians, and it just goes round and round and round. And sometimes I take it as a joke, but I think it does a lot of harm to Latin people as a whole to be so hostile towards each other sometimes.
Interesting. Thanks, Carlos. And last but not least, Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Mcfarland. I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant. And so what I'll be talking about is being a person with a disability. I was born with bilateral hip dysplasia. And then I'll also be talking about being the head of household in my family. So as a person with a disability, some of the common things are like things that are said to me that are microaggressions are like the first is, what's wrong with you? So I get that a lot, where people are, and really what they're asking, or could have asked in a better way, or, you know, tell me more about your disability. Like that's kind of the better way of putting it. But when someone asks what's wrong with you, it inherently kind of infers that by having a disability, like there's something wrong with it, or something bad about having a disability. And usually, so I'll tell them, because I don't want them to be afraid to ask more about disabilities. And then when I do, then often it's followed up by, or sometimes people are a little cheeky and they'll say, well, the only disability is a bad attitude. And then to that, I'm like, well, you know, no matter how much I smile at that staircase, it doesn't turn into an elevator. And it's just really, it's the understanding. It's like, you can use little catchy phrases like that, but it really doesn't help me. It's so, yeah, I like to really like think about some of these little messages that they're sending. It's like having that real positive attitude. It's like, sure, it helps anybody through life, but does it really change the things that I need changed in the world around me? No, I really need a curb cut. That helps me, or I need an elevator. And those things just don't change. Some of the other things I get are like, you're an inspiration, or you're so brave. And it's not like when I do something cool like this, like speak publicly. It's usually like when I'm grocery shopping or like lugging my bags to the airport, like some random stranger will say that to me. And so what it's really about is that's like those moments where they can really see that I have a disability. And what they're saying is that in their mind, it's horrible that I have a disability. And like, just me going on with living is an inspiration, or that I'm brave by doing that. And it's kind of condescending, and and it's insulting, like the way that they're saying that. And so I wouldn't recommend telling people that. And if you want to say something, if you feel like you have to say something, I would say something more about just talking about like admiring the resilience that somebody has. Maybe not so much just like talking about like them being an inspiration or being brave, because people, they've heard that and it gets very frustrating. And then regarding the head of household, so just another layer of diversity, in case you're curious about other microaggressions that I get. My husband's African American. We have a biracial child. And so about 15 years ago, we decided that my husband was going to be the one that was more of like the caretaker. So we kind of flipped roles, where he does, almost all of the cooking and most of the jobs at home. For a while, he stayed at home and didn't have a job outside the house. Now he teaches in a school, but for a while he didn't. And our family really struggled, or just even friends, like really just struggled with that of how did that work? And so even though we explained to them, like this was our family setup, they would just keep saying, well, I pray that he finds a job one day. And they just weren't understanding that, no, this is our setup. And then they would say other things like if we would have people over, we would like take our family like out to eat and we'd pick up the tab. Well, you can't afford that. No, don't do, like they just really weren't understanding, like we can afford things. And it really came to a head one day when my husband had an uncle who died, and then his family made the decision for him, like, no, we told them you're not going to the funeral because we know you can't afford this. And then finally, he eventually shared my income because it just was ridiculous. Like they just could not fathom that I could possibly make enough to support our family. And but then there were other little things from like my side of the family too, of like, must be nice to have somebody wait on you hand and foot. And it's like, but would you get comments like that if it were flipped? Like if I had stayed home and then he had worked, you wouldn't get any of this. So it was purely just these gender roles being flipped, of just like it was viewed that somebody was waiting on me hand and foot because it was the male doing the cooking and the male doing the cleaning, and that, a female was earning that she couldn't possibly be earning as much. So those were some of the interesting microaggressions, and really what to say instead. I just think that that you maybe don't need to say something instead, or maybe just kind of check your biases and understand, like, if they want to compliment Ron on his food, he is an amazing cook. So I think you can do that, but I don't think there's a need to make that microaggression or the dig like headed in my direction.
Thanks, Mary. And thanks, everyone. Some great perspectives, great examples. Mary, do we have some questions in the chat?
We sure do. But before we start with what's in the chat, I have a question. So this actually came from a brother who has been, I don't know, who's been out maybe within the past 10 years. She is of, I think it's Indian descent, if I'm not mistaken. And her comment was that her boss for the past 5 years has mispronounced her name. So my question to all of you is, if any of you have had that happen, how would you handle that?
I guess I can go real quick, Mary. So I have a couple of things on that, right? So it's two things. I mean, you know, going to a Chick-fil-A and having them wait on you while they say your name right is one thing, and then them not pronouncing your name correctly at a professional work setting is a completely different thing, right? So for me, my funny restaurant name is Jim because it's just so much easier to just get it done. And, you know, I don't want to, it's faster for them to give me my coffee at a Starbucks than wait to, you know, while I'm happy to do that if I have the time, but at the same time, I just want to get my food and get out of there, especially in these conditions, right? So that's one thing. However, in a work setting, I try to take the time to understand how to say a person's name and learn how to pronounce their name before I do it. So I actually had this incident yesterday where a new member joined our team and her name was, you know, Pan, Le. And I was like, hey, is it Pan or Lay or what do I say? How do I say your name? And she said, oh, it's Lay. So you can say it that way. And then she asked how I should say my name. So I feel like introducing that conversation and saying, hey, how do I say your name correctly? Even if it's as simple as like Michael or Andrew or whatever it is. It might sound a little bit like, oh, what are you doing? But at the same time, it initiates a counter response to say, oh, maybe I should also ask how to say your name, knowing that it's a much harder name to say. And sometimes, you know, even in I think I've tried to do this in my LinkedIn, they're doing great things to add pronunciations and just other ways and means to help people recognize how your name is said. And so I would say just having a conversation about it and really asking how to say it, I think will go a long way.
So one of my questions to follow up with that. So if I'm having trouble pronouncing it, if I say to you, okay, can you give me something it rhymes with? That helps me remember that. Would you be offended by me asking that question?
I think it depends on what the rhyme is, I guess. I've never had that happen to me.
Okay.
But the way that I get people to pronounce my name is by saying sir, like S-I-R-Y-A. So Surya. And I will try very hard to correct you every single time that you say it like incorrectly, you know, just depending on how it is. Like, so it's actually Surya. And then they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then they'll go back and redo it. So I think a moment of like uncomfortable back and forth is much better than a long term of somebody mispronouncing your name or just not saying it or blatantly just not saying it right. Maybe that's because I'm more extroverted and vocal and I like to, you know, set things straight. But I know that a lot of Indians that, especially Indians that are my coworkers are just too shy to kind of speak up and say that. And I think that's something that has to happen both ways. And, you know, it's just something that you have to recognize that a name is a very important thing and that you have to learn how to pronounce it in order to work successfully together. So, yeah.
Yeah, to kind of take that and see if anybody else has any input. You know, I think, Mary, you know, you were raising an issue where it's a person's boss who's not pronouncing their name correctly. And in that power, you know, those power levels where it's a manager, you know, how might people recommend handling when it's your superior who's the perpetrator of a microaggression? Maybe, you know, in this case, it's mispronouncing this person's name, but it could be other things like overlooking you in a meeting because of your gender or your race, or how do you handle things in the workplace when it's your manager that's doing the microaggression?
Yeah,
I
would just say, I think, you know, typically, classically, we've, you know, kind of said you should raise it in private the first time and then as you go. And I think that's a good place to start still. That said, if it persists, I think doing it in a group setting where other people are there to notice it can be very powerful and beneficial. It doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always feel comfortable. I like the example there that, even if it's awkward for a couple of minutes while you're practicing a name, that's better than 5 years, I think the question said, to go through. Even if it's 5 years, as someone who mispronounces names, take me aside and tell me that I'm doing it wrong. And I think that, a professional worth their salt would appreciate that quite a bit. But I would start in private on any of the microaggressions. And then if it doesn't, then you may have to bring in other people, an HR person or a trusted colleague. But that would be my recommendation, Karen.
Thanks, Greg. Anybody else have any thoughts about how you handle microaggressions with a manager?
Speaking as a manager, I appreciate what Gregory said. No, I think most of us, we've gotten into a managerial role because, we possess those qualities. So as uncomfortable as it may be, if you pull that person to the side and go, hey, do you realize that you've been pronouncing my name wrong? And just have that side conversation with them, I think it would go a long way. Now, after that, much to Gregory's point, if it continues, then obviously they're just, been a butthole and you need to take it further. So, but I mean, even my name, Ollie doesn't seem that complicated, but when I say it, people don't understand what I'm saying. So I have to tell them to say Holly and then take off the H, or Molly and take off the M, and then they get it. I too have a Starbucks or a club name, if you will, and it's Ty. The first two letters are my middle name just because it's easier. So.
Interesting, thanks. Fina, did you have something?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to be advocates for like more junior colleagues as well, or newer employees, because I actually came across that where somebody just started in the company, and her name was pretty complicated to pronounce. And she told me in confidence, and she's like, I kind of want to correct my manager, but I don't feel like it's my place because I'm new and blah, blah, blah. So, I kind of like coached her through it. And eventually, she got the courage to tell her manager. And I knew the manager really well too. So, context and all that. But he kept mispronouncing her name. So we went out to lunch together, and we're, kind of talking about names and joking. And I was like, oh yeah, her, Akriti, that's how you pronounce her name. But a lot of people say Akriti, So it's like kind of reinforcement in a very casual way. But I think it's important for us to be advocates, especially for more junior colleagues too, because, they're still trying to pave their way, and so they don't want to, rock any boats.
And building on Fina's point, often it's not done in bad faith. It's just like they don't know how to do it better. So when you tell them how to do it better, they most likely will do it better from then on. But like Ollie and Gregory said, if it continues, then the issue is more than just a mispronouncing of the name.
Yeah. Thanks, Fina. Thanks, Carlos.
Well, to go on with what you had said, Karen, is, and Andrew asked this question. He says, it's basically, I guess it's one thing to have it when it is, let's say, in the office or in your company. It's something completely different when it's coming from a customer and you're that customer, that facing person. So any feedback from the panel on that? And Ollie, especially, with what you do, you're seeing so many customers face to face. Love to hear what you have to say about that.
I'm probably a little more, I don't want to use the word aggressive than my staff is, because I'm the general manager, so I can get away with a little bit more than they can. But normally, if they pronounce my name wrong, or I'll just repeat it back to them, so they'll go, oh, hey, Ollie, no, Ollie, just quick off the, just Ollie. And then I keep moving, and so if it happens again, I just, same thing, Ollie, and I just keep moving with the conversation. I think most, again, society tells us that we're inherently bad. I think most people are inherently good. And if you just have that side conversation with them, I think, just about anything can be corrected. It's just all in the way that you handle it.
Yeah, I think most rational, person would want to learn how to properly pronounce your name, right? So they'd probably prefer that you tell them than just let it flow for a while and then they find out that they've been mispronouncing your name the whole time.
Okay. What about, and so the,
hold on. Yeah, I know Greg did. Yeah, sorry, Mary. Greg, did you want to say something?
It was more about just customer microaggressions than it was about names specifically. I think customers, and Andrew, I think your question is along the lines of microaggressions for customers. Context matters. I think that if this is a customer that you're going to have a long-term ongoing relationship with, eventually it is going to come to a head and you're going to have to work with your team to determine how you're going to work around it. Perhaps it's changing some of the roles. Look, it would be nice just to say, well, you're going to tell the customer the what for. Well, I have customers that are in the Middle East and they're going to ask about my wife. And in some cases, it's not appropriate to answer that question. It's okay. Is this the right setting for me to be in? Am I the right person to have this or do we think we have enough of a relationship to give a little bit more honesty about my personal situation with this customer because we've brought them, to a different place or we're out, the context so matters. In the case of retail, is the customer buying something and they're going to stay there or are they leaving? I think that those things should be considered. I would wait on the side of integrity where possible and being honest and open, but in some cases, you're just going to have to understand what else is going on with that relationship. It's a great question.
Yeah, thanks. Mary, did you have a follow-up or a new question?
No, I'm going to go ahead and go with Norm had asked a question and he said, Ray made a point, although this is for everyone, that asking how many of you have heard that term, you are not blank enough. And is that a form of microaggression and what can people do to help with that? Or how do you address that?
All right, anybody want to take that one on? Ray or Ollie?
Or Ollie, did you want to go first?
Go for it.
So the best way to adjust that if someone does approach you, if you are being told you're not anything enough, a lot of people do believe that that is a compliment, that you are above, whatever they think that the specific stereotype is. However, they need to be taught that they're actually limiting you and they're prejudging you and saying that you are only limited to a certain capacity. They don't realize that when they're saying that. So letting them know, whatever the stereotype may be, whether you're not Black enough or you are not strong enough or anything, let them know that, or maybe ask a question, why did they approach you in that manner? Why did they feel in the very beginning that you were not worthy enough in their mind of whatever you're doing, whether it's in the workplace, whether it is in social setting, just having those hard conversations, asking questions, why their thought process is the way they are. It could definitely form a lot of good conversation. I think in that realm, it could seem that it could become tense, but I do believe a lot of people don't really realize that they're saying anything derogatory in that manner.
Ray, this was something that I had wanted to kind of follow up with you too on this topic. And it is, now that, like you said, you took some of these comments of you don't act like a Black person, or these comments that you had heard growing up more as a compliment. Now you're realizing it's a microaggression because they're making assumptions about what should a Black person be like, and then Yeah, so just to what you said, it's definitely a microaggression. Do you, I think asking questions is a wonderful strategy. Is there other things that you say to people when that still comes up? What do you tell people today now that you're aware that they're acting out of a microaggression or unconscious bias?
So when I'm told that I don't act Black enough, the question that really gets people thinking is when I ask, okay, well, how do Black people act? They can't really answer that question, because then I think in that moment they realize, oh my goodness, I said something that's not appropriate. And, that is a moment for them to realize that for themselves, that they have actually set a predetermined judgment on Black people, how we're, deemed to act by other groups. And they stop, and then, they apologize. And it's warming when I see that transition of a thought process, because I do believe that there are more good people than bad people. And I do believe that people have good intentions rather than bad intentions, but it's either A, how they were raised, or B, just because they just wasn't raised around a lot of anything. So I come from an area where there were only 6 Black people in my graduating class, and 4 of them were my cousins. So it was, when things were said in that nature, it was a little bit easier to have those conversations, because it was all like we were all family anyway, because we did everything together. But it was interesting, going back home and visiting and being able to ask those specific questions that I didn't ask when I was younger. It's good to see their thought process and the transformation moment, like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how a simple question can really get people thinking? Thank you. Ollie, did you think you had something you wanted to share around this as well?
I think Ray covered it pretty good. I just, as far as the workplace goes, I've noticed, and Ray can probably attest to this, and it's probably true for a lot of us that come from a diverse background. I have to operate somewhat differently than my fairer skinned counterparts. I have to be very methodical with how I follow the rules, because if I think outside of the box or do something that goes against the grain or the policy, if it works, great, I'm the hero. If it doesn't, I'm the person that can't follow the rules, can't follow protocol. I'm not seen as the maverick. I'm seen as the rebel, if you will. So, I've been very aware in the hospitality business and business in general that I've had to play the game slightly different to get to where I am. I've seen some of my colleagues literally go off on our boss, and they still have their job. And there's no way that I could get away with that.
That's a great point. And I want to put that out to the rest of the panel, this different standards for different people based on, again, people's judgment or stereotypes. Does anybody else on the panel have thoughts or experiences where you're being held to a different standard? Maybe not.
I'll say, as someone who came out as trans in the workplace, I think, there is the microaggression as well, or people think, and they even say, they're like, well, I don't care who you are outside of work, but why is this relevant in the workplace? And I think that's where professionalism comes in, right? Where a lot of times professionalism is what we project and stereotype onto others. When a boss tells someone sometimes you don't seem as professional, sometimes that can mean you're not a lot like me. And I think that's something really, for a lot of people who are managers, aspire to be managers and leaders, that it's something to consider. I mean, if somebody has like tattoos, does that really impact their job in the office? Piercings, etc. So I think it takes the person to recognize that bias, but maybe that's even our role as well, to say, hey, let's take a step back and ask, why does this matter?
Yeah, thank you. And I think, speaking from the LGBT perspective myself, I know it's an issue that our community runs into, which is a perceived lack of professionalism. And I think it's because when people think of someone, let's say, who's gay or bisexual, thinking on the sexual orientation side, it brings that, sexual orientation, sex, and so people that can come to the forefront in their minds, even when it shouldn't. I mean, we all we all have a sexual orientation, but there's something about people who are LGBT and that, in that sense, that can bring up those issues of professionalism. It's definitely something that affects our community. Great, Mary, any other questions?
Oh, yes, so absolutely. So this is from Jen from New England, who says, for anyone who's experienced microaggressions, do you correct those who say them right away? And if not, when is the right time to correct/educate? What suggestions do you have for allies to help minimize microaggressions?
I'll start answering if that's okay.
Go ahead, Raymond.
I think it's best to address them right away, especially if it's amongst a group of people. One, it's very embarrassing, so it's definitely it's definitely easy to shut down, and because it comes out of left field sometimes. So trying to address it immediately, expressing why it's a microaggression and why it's offensive, and letting people know what to say other than what they have been saying, could not only be a lesson to them, but it could be a lesson to everyone else that's around. They either A, may have thought the same, or B, have not been privy to the situation prior, but now they know. So when they approach the people of the same, then they won't make that same judgment or that same measure of offensiveness. And also based on their intentions, sometimes people do, say those things intentionally to hurt someone, and they do it in front of people to embarrass them. So you definitely want to make a point to nip it in the bud in the beginning, because then you're setting the precedent of how people should address you and how people should treat you. Don't let anyone devalue you based on anything that's going on.
Thanks, Raymond. Other thoughts from the panel on this question about when and how do you address microaggressions? Right away? Yeah, go ahead. Is it Mary? Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
So I have a problem, and maybe it saves me sometimes, where I'm not very quick on my feet, like when I get a microaggression. So one time somebody had said, like, about and it was when I was much younger, about my disability. They said, I'm embarrassed for you. And I wish, like, now I'm just thinking of so many things that I could have said to them. It's like, and what do you say to something like that? Like, thank you. I've been carrying this load of being embarrassed for myself. It's, been so hard. I'm glad you can share the load with me. It's just like, what do you say to somebody who says something like that? But, later on, like, as I thought about it, I did, talk to them later, and it's like, I asked them, like, why did you say that to me? That was such a, uncomfortable thing to say that. But at first, when they said it, I didn't know what to say. I was so shocked. And that's usually how I feel when somebody makes a comment like that. I'm stunned and I'm not quite sure what to say. So I'm a delayed reaction person. And so usually what I do is I think about it, and then I find time later, and then I go back and I talk through it. And I get out, like, all my little snarky comments in my head. And then I think about, like, what's really going to be the most effective comment to say to them, and a way to work through it. So I I think that it's okay if you're not somebody that can catch it right there and just revisit it and just say, I was really thinking about something you said yesterday. Is it okay if I share some feedback with you, and just handle it that way?
That sounds good. I think, Lauren, you were unmuted, and then Carlos. So let's go to Lauren first, then Carlos.
Yeah, and really to piggyback on that last point you made, Mary, it's all about how you bring it up, right? So if you make it an issue of, hey, this is the right or wrong thing to say, sometimes people might double down and it might be counterproductive, right? People intrinsically sometimes get defensive, but if you make it objective, like, hey, this is how it made me feel, it made me uncomfortable, someone is more willing possibly to interpret and, take that to heart. Like, oh, I don't want to make someone feel uncomfortable, versus being blatantly wrong.
Thanks. Carlos, yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of like in the other spectrum from Mary, so I sometimes react too fast. So I'm gonna take her advice and take my snarky comments out of my head before I react so fast. But I always try to approach it from a point of like, hey, they're not trying to hurt you on purpose, they just don't know better. So I usually try to respond right away from that mindset, like, hey, they need education about this issue regarding you, and usually has worked pretty well for me so far.
Good. Fina?
Yeah, and I think understanding the personalities too is very important, because I have a colleague that would be crushed if I called her out on something in front of everyone, and I know it would bother her forever about it, even though she wasn't intentional about certain things. Whereas I have a boss who's like, if anything like that ever happens, tell me right away, I don't care. So it's, kind of navigating the personalities too will be very important on how you address.
Thanks. Yeah, the relationship you might have with someone is going to be important. Any other thoughts on this? Or there was another piece to the question, which was, how do we be allies for each other in situations? And for instance, Fina, I know you had said earlier you were an ally for a younger colleague, and helping to stand up for that person. I know if anybody had thoughts on how we be allies when we see these situations happen for others and speaking up on their behalf.
This kind of applies, but not really. Like my company is trying to increase diversity. So I've made sure that I'm involved in a lot of those efforts to increase diversity from a recruiting perspective. So I think helping from that front helps a lot, make your place in the company a little better and more comfortable, but also improve the company's performance from the perspective from different people. So I think that's a way to help indirectly people who are diverse within your company. So that's what I've been doing. I recommend people do too.
Thanks. And I think I find sometimes, as an ally, if you speak up on behalf of somebody else and say, hey, what you just said, I don't think was, appropriate, they might take it better from you than directly, if that person is uncomfortable, or if there are people who aren't in the room. So somebody says something about a woman and it's all men in the room, a male ally in that room could raise that, and those other men would hear that maybe in a way, it's unfortunate, but would hear that maybe in a way that they maybe wouldn't from a woman. So we can be allies in terms of really getting some people to hear us, I think. Great. So Mary, what's next?
Absolutely. Okay, this is from Corey Stopka. And he asked, how can someone approach a conversation relating to DEI to start a conversation? What are good questions for someone to ask to start and continue a conversation?
So in a work setting, I think a good high level start of a conversation could be like, hey, I'm just curious, what are some of the initiatives in the office? Do we have D&I goals? I'm just trying to understand a little bit better. And then you can kind of build off of that, based on what areas are the the main focus for the company. But that's usually how I start. That's been pretty helpful when I visit our different offices. So.
Any other thoughts on kind of DEI or DEI or D&I in general and approaching those kind of conversations in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that, this is where the internet can really be your friend. So for a larger company, they'll obviously have something on their website where you can go to. But that doesn't mean if you're in a medium-sized or small company that it's not possible for you. There are certainly consultants out there, some on this panel, that could certainly help you with that discussion. And also there's a number of websites, I think for the LGBT community, Out and Equal in the Workplace is a really great one to help with that dialogue, to think through what are the questions or what are the things we could be doing here. Also during your interview, I think is a great time to ask that question, to have that dialogue directly with the person you're talking to. Even if you're interviewing intercompany for a larger company like us, the culture, and Karen and Lauren and I all work for the same company, but the culture where Karen works and where Lauren works is different from the culture where I work. And so trying to see whether I'm a fit into those divisions and parts of the business is important to me. The other thing I would say, just going on the what not to say, and this is something I think, and I know at GE we're really working hard on this, but sometimes the question puts the burden on the wrong folks. And so with the stuff that happened in this past summer around the Black Lives Matter movement, I noticed a lot of people asking our Black colleagues what they could do, and that is the wrong question. The question should be, what are you specifically yourself? What am I doing? Because of you're shifting this unnecessary burden on the folks in the workplace. And that is hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for a lot of other people. But the question isn't, well, Greg, what should we do about the LGBT community? It might not be the right question. So I think doing that research, thinking through, how do I approach this? The question in and of itself is a great question. How do we think about inclusion and diversity in our space? That's a great question to start with. Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're looking to join a company, a great place to look to get a sense of it, their website, of course, but one thing, if they've got their non-discrimination policy posted, you can see, does it cover, if companies that would also cover LGBT, sexual orientation, gender identity inherently tend to be maybe a more open and diverse company anyway, because if they're covering us, they're probably covering all other aspects of the diverse spectrum as well. Any other thoughts on general D&I and how we approach that or learn about it in the workplace?
I would just add, with the website, if they have affinity groups, it's always a good place to look, and how can you engage and talk with them about that?
Great, thanks. Mary, back to you.
Okay, another question came in. It says, how do you survive and continue working in an unfriendly or hostile office environment?
Get out.
Get out.
I mean, that's the simple answer. I've had that before. My first hotel that I worked at in Clearwater, Florida, the manager under me was I don't want to say blatantly racist, but I think she was unconsciously, she would say things that she didn't maybe realize were kind of racist. And, I would go away on a task force assignment for a couple of weeks to go babysit another hotel, and I'd come back and, I have employees telling me, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. And it got to a point where I felt like I needed to go talk to my boss, but again, I didn't want to sound like a whiner or a complainer. So it was a delicate balance. And my answer to that was just work my tail off and get promoted and get out of the situation. So that's my get out answer. I don't know that I have much more to contribute to that. I mean, it's tough to work in that kind of environment. And it's usually not just a one person thing. It's usually the environment itself. And it takes a very strong leader to come in and change that environment.
Thanks, Ollie. Mary?
I think that's what's kind of tough about the microaggressions. And in one of these sessions, I've been in a few of these sessions before, we used the example of microaggressions are kind of like drops of water. And we had someone hold out a pitcher, and it's almost like they feel like, you know, one drop of water you can handle, but eventually they'll fill up a pitcher, and you're like holding that pitcher out with your arm, you know, all day long, every day, and it's exhausting. And so that's what it's kind of like. And I've definitely been in a situation like where you've had a manager who, you know, has those, you know, gives you those microaggressions. And so you can point out one thing and it's like, oh, you're being overly sensitive. It was just a little thing. And it's like, okay, that one incident was just a little drop of water, just one little paper cut. But it's like, it's every day, all year long. And it's just like, I can't take it anymore. And it wears you down. And you eventually do have to figure out, you know, where do you get your kind of sanity check, or where do you get, you know, your way of escaping, or eventually you do need to, if you can't find a way to remedy that situation, you need self-care. Like you need to find a way to take care of yourself and make sure you're in a place where you can thrive. And I've had that situation where I moved, you know, away from that situation. And then I look back and I'm like, why on earth did I put up with it for that long? And it almost is like, you think you deserve it, or you think it was just a little thing. And then you realize how unhealthy that was for you.
Yeah, I will build on Mary's comment that sometimes it can be scary to leave a place of work when you have your financial security and all that stuff. But once you leave and you find yourself in a place where you appreciate it, your whole world changes, because you're happier every day. You're happy when you go to work. You're happy after work, and it just makes everything much easier. You perform much better too. So I second Mary's comment. I second Ollie's comment that if you try to fix a problem and it's not changing, just look for a way out.
Thanks, Carlos. Okay, I want to be mindful of the time. We've got about 6 minutes left to the half hour. Mary Miracle, how many more questions do we have?
That is the end of the questions from in chat. You know, as someone who's, I'm gonna say, let's say a little bit more seasoned than others, my question, yeah, Greg, I see you smiling, Greg. You know what I mean by that. Is it getting better? I know I don't know if it'll ever be perfect. Is it getting better?
Good question. Maybe this is the one we can finish it up on. And if you want to answer, just come off mute, and the panelists, and I'll start calling on you. Carlos, looks like. Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, I've been in the workforce for about 10 years now, and I definitely feel people are trying a lot harder. So that's a first step that's very important. So I can't say it's getting better everywhere because I haven't been everywhere, but I see people all over trying much harder to take this into consideration. I think that's a big step.
Thanks. Fina?
I think people are more willing to have conversations now and ask the tough questions, and more people are willing to share their experiences. So I think, you know, the fact that we're all sharing and hearing it more kind of moves us forward a little bit, even though there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. Other thoughts from the panel on, do we think it's getting better? And maybe focusing on the workplace here. Do we think our workplaces are getting better?
I absolutely think so. Just this past summer, around all the Black Lives Matter stuff, our CEO put out a statement. And then, of course, it was the middle of the pandemic, so everybody had time. But he started to receive a whole lot of feedback based on that statement that he sent. And so later he came out with another statement thanking everyone for their stories and helping him to understand things a little better. So I definitely think things are getting better. I worked my career to put myself in position to help that process along. So I've certainly tried to do my part to push push things into that direction.
Great, thanks. Mary Mcfarland.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen, and I think it's different by different demographic groups, but from like a person with disabilities demographic, from when I started like 20 years ago in my career to where it is today, it's significantly different. Like I don't think I experienced the same level of microaggressions today that I did first in my career. So I'm definitely seeing an improvement, but I also realize each demographic has their own challenges and are improving at a different pace.
Thanks. Lauren?
Yeah, I just want to say, yes, it is getting better, but there's also a long way to go. So there's no reason to get complacent. We still have a long way to go.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Yeah, I think my experience both as a woman and as a lesbian, I think it's gotten better for sure at my company. And there's always room to educate, room to grow. So with that, I want to just thank everyone for attending. I want to thank our panelists, just wonderful stories, wonderful conversation. Thanks for your honesty and openness. Really, I think hopefully everybody can take a little bit away from this. Mary, hand it to you and Jim for any final comments.
Well, to all of those of you who attended, I hope this has been valuable. I know I've been sitting here taking notes myself, and you know, it doesn't get better without a conversation, and this is a great place to start. To our panelists, thank you so much for volunteering your time to be here with us today. And Karen, you are as good as Andrew Baer, actually better than what Andrew Baer said you were. Okay, so we thank all of you for again being here to help us and to help us understand. And on behalf of Cincinnati Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Pi, again, cannot say thank you to all who have participated. Thanks guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Thanks, everyone.